TheLandofIsrael.com and IsraelNationalNews.com present Ari and Jeremy Gimpel. Live from the heart of Israel, it's Tuesday Night Live in Jerusalem.
Shalom and welcome back to Tuesday Night Live in Jerusalem.
One of the reasons that we decided to take our show out of Jerusalem, out of our comfort zone, around the world, is really to thank our friends. You know, too often, people are not appreciated, are not recognized. And the word Jew, Yehudi, comes from the word lehodot, to thank. And a fundamental tenet of Judaism is to express gratitude and thanks. And really, to stand and defend Israel in the world we live in today, we all know, is not an easy and a simple task. It's often thankless and exhausting. So we wanted to change that for one night and to recognize a few of the brave warriors who are out there really defending and protecting Israel. So we want to start this evening just by inviting out the Deputy Consul General of Israel. Hey, how are you?
All right. Good to see you, Paul. So here's the question that we have. Very often, Israel's always on the defensive. You know, we have a word for it. It's called hasbara. In Hebrew, it means to explain. We're always explaining ourselves, how we did this, why we did this. And if we were to just take that aside for one night and say, instead of defending ourselves, instead of doing hasbara and explaining our position, what would be the positive message the state of Israel has for the world?
If I could, I just want to take off from what you were talking about thanking and say that we've got here tonight members of the Florida Jewish community. In the time I've been here, this, I can tell you, is not only one of the largest, but more importantly, one of the warmest and most embracing Jewish communities in the world. I have to tell you, those of you who call this state the Sunshine State, I've been here now almost 3 years. I've never seen so much rain in all my life. You should come out with me to some of the outlying neighborhoods of Beersheba. I'll show you what sunshine is all about. And that's the beginning of the answer to your question. Israel is open for business. Our economy grew last year by 4.5%. Our exports to China and to India grew by over 100% to each of those two countries. Incredible opportunities happening in Israel. And the first message is come to Israel and to see. Business, when done correctly, both sides win. And there are incredible opportunities in Israel. Our beaches, our restaurants, our art galleries, our museums are blossoming and are booming and are full.
Our synagogues, our yeshivas, the spirituality.
Absolutely.
Very good.
Absolutely. And there's not any stream or any group in Judaism which doesn't require their students to spend time in Israel. It's really become the center when you talk about our yeshivot, it's the center of the discussion, it's the center of the debate, and that's where things are really happening. So really the first message is, that, and that's true for the whole world, is that Israel is open for business and you should come and seek opportunities and spend some time and some of your hard currency at the same time in Israel. I would just specifically for America say to you this, and that is when I look at the peoples of the world, and try and find those which are most similar to us. Cosmopolitan society, pluralistic society, an immigrant society, a democratic society, entrepreneurial society, a society which places a value on education, which admires the arts, an observant society. It's difficult for me to find a people anywhere in the world more like us than the Americans. We are best friends. We have the most in common, and out of those commonalities are derived our common interests. And that's really, I would say, the two messages I would bring tonight.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you.
And thank you for coming to Florida.
All right.
This is one of those moments in a young lad's life that he's just been dreaming about. It is really my merit to present this Defender of Israel Award to my personal hero for so long since I'm a young kid. As the director of the oldest pro-Israel organization in America, this man has dedicated his entire life to defending Israel and standing for Israel, and we would like to present him with the Defender of Israel Award, director of the Zionist Organization of America, Mort Klein.
We hug on this show. That's what we do.
We're huggers. Mort,
Well,
you know,
thank you.
Well, thank you. Your job, your life's task purpose is not only about activism, but it's about education. And you stare this barrage of false accusations and misrepresentations right in the eye. If you had to clarify one misconception about Israel, what would that misconception be? And clarify it for us.
Well, of course, there are tragically, unfortunately, many misconceptions, but if you ask me to pick one, I would say the misconception that there is an occupation. First of all, Israel has given away all of Gaza, about half of Judea and Samaria. That's where 99% of the Palestinian Arabs live. So there's no more occupation. Even if you could have used that term before, you can't use it now. But even before, you couldn't use it. Because when Israel captured these lands in a defensive war from Jordan, Jordan was not the sovereign owner of the West Bank, of Judea and Samaria. They had taken it over illegally in the 48 war, held onto it illegally until 67, illegal occupation. Only 2 countries in the world recognized their being in Judea and Samaria. So the fact that Israel took this from someone who had no legal right to be there makes it impossible to call this an occupation. So I would say that's one of the biggest...
You see this crowd here tonight. Over 1,200 people have packed the house here in the Parker Playhouse. So many people love Israel, and they're just waiting to express that love. What would you say they can do, the people in America? What is the most important thing they can do for Israel?
I would say to educate yourself if you're not totally familiar with the issues of the Arab war against Israel and make it clear to your congressmen, Jewish leaders, rabbis who are not as informed about this, about the reality and the truth of the Arab war against Israel. We must let the world know that the Palestinian Authority has no interest in a real peace with Israel. They don't have a single map showing Israel even within the 67 border. They don't arrest a single anti-Israel or anti-American terrorist. They promote hatred and violence against Israel and Americans in their schools, in their media, in their sermons, in their speeches. So despite the fact that Israel is given so much and even offered more, the Arabs refuse to even negotiate now. So that's the most important thing I think we can do, is to make it clear that there is an Arab war against Israel in which they want Israel destroyed. And even when it comes to Christians, they have a horrific record against Christians. Bethlehem used to be 80% Christian, 20% Muslim. They've made life for Christians so miserable that now Bethlehem is 80% Muslim and only 20% Christian. And we must tell our members of Congress to stop giving $1.3 billion in aid to the Palestinian Authority, $1.3 billion, unless they comply with all their agreements. The things I mentioned are things they promised in writing to do. They've done none of them. And we must let our members of the House and Senate know that we must not dare, certainly not at this point in time, allow the establishment of a Palestinian Arab state. This will be yet another terrorist state in the Middle East, endangering Israel and endangering the stability of the Middle East. Thank you, sir.
I met our next guest here in Southern Florida, and as soon as I heard her speak, it was unbelievable. She is a real fighter. She's been fighting her whole life for Israel. She's dedicated years and years traveling from city to city, just advocating for the Jewish state, and very often being booed out of crowds, kicked off campuses for being a Zionist. And tonight, we want to say thank you. Thank you for everything that she's done. She's the director of Americans for a Safe Israel. She's flown in from New York to be on the show tonight, and we'd love to honor Helen Freedman with the Defenders of Israel Award.
I'm just going to give the quick Americans for a Safe Israel message, which is that we believe in a Yisrael Shlema, that's a whole Israel. That means no division of Jerusalem. And when they talk about illegal settlements in Jerusalem, it's so absurd. Judea, Samaria, the Golan, the Negev, We worked so hard to prevent the destruction of the Gush Katif settlements. And I use the word settlements without embarrassment because people settle there and they live there and they make their homes there, and there's nothing wrong with that word. It's just the language that has been distorted, and we have to educate ourselves. American Jews have to really educate ourselves in terms of the delegitimization of Israel and what's gone on with the distortion of language. Because even this constant use of the term Palestinians, there is no such group. These are Arabs. So we have to, Mort spoke about educating ourselves. It's very, very important so that when we're on the campuses, we can refute the arguments that are made. And when we read articles in newspapers like the New York Times that denigrate Israel, we are able to write a letter to the editor and take issue with those things. So my message to Americans, Jews and Christians, those who love Israel, is to learn about our biblical heritage. There is no roadmap that's better than the biblical roadmap. That's the one that we want to follow.
Thank you.
Our next awardee's name is synonymous with pro-Israel. She's an extraordinarily popular radio show on 850 WFTL. Word is that the average Floridian actually seeks out the worst traffic jams between 12 and 3 so they can listen to her show in the car. And I know from what I've heard I would do the exact same. Please welcome Joyce Kaufman.
Thank you not only for coming here to South Florida. We get a lot of bad press, and it's nice that the people of Israel have a chance to see how supportive we really are. And if I had one message to send back to Israel or to American Jews and Christians and Buddhists and people of good conscience all over the world, to me the argument can be made on many levels. The political, which Mort made very well, the political/spiritual, which Helen made very well, and then the utterly spiritual one, which I always end every speech with. The reason Israel deserves to be where it is, flourishing the way it is, because God said it, and that settles it.
Let me ask you, day in and day out, 3 hours a day at the very least, and you probably have talk at home also, you are immersed in Israel. You're constantly facing this tide of delegitimization and lies. Where do you get the strength? Where does your passion come from?
Comes from above. You know, you have to make a decision early on when you talk about anything on the radio, and that is, do you really believe what you're saying? Because the public is much smarter than you imagine, and they will catch you if you're insincere, or if you're not consistent, or if you don't do your research. So over the years, I decided any message that I had about the nation of Israel had to be based on fact, had to be based on a biblical perspective. The Old Testament is rich with stories and analogies, and they've just helped me to be able to present material. Now, I'm not only immersed, as most people know, in the politics of Israel and its relationship with America, but with the politics of America. And if you asked me what the one thing the Jews in America have to stop doing in order to show their support for Israel, it's stop voting for Democrats. Thank you.
This show is apolitical, just so you know. The last question that everybody wants to really hear the answer to. Disney character, Prime Minister, who is it?
Well, you know, I thought about this a long time while I was backstage, and, you know, some people were saying characters that weren't Disney characters, and that was a little embarrassing. So I thought, what are some of the movies that I've seen? And I thought, you know, really it'd be far out if Aladdin was the Prime Minister of Israel. Because didn't we have magic carpets first? Thank you.
All right, Joyce, thank you so much.
I want to introduce the Miami Gardens City Councilman, Andre Williams. I met him the other day, and let me tell you, in addition to fighting crime and fighting poverty, he's like a superhero. He has passed local pro-Israel legislation, setting a great example for the rest of the country. He's an incredible leader, and he is pro-Israel to the hilt. And I just had to introduce all of you to him.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ari.
Thank you. One quick question. You know, in Israel, I personally, and we as a nation, consider Dr. Martin Luther King, it was recently Martin Luther King Day, to be a tremendous hero, a historical, tremendous figure. We're the only country, as a matter of fact, in the entire world that has a day in recognition of Dr. Martin Luther King.
I'm very proud of that.
Why do you think it's important for members of your community, of the African American community, to continue in his legacy and support Israel and stand with Israel?
Certainly, and thank you for having me at this wonderful event. You have a great crowd. And how do I answer that? Well, Dr. King and I are both devout Christians, and we learned from a religious perspective at a very young age to accept all folks. And all of our all of the communities of this world are our brothers and sisters. We learned a great love for Israel, and my grandmother taught me that, and she grew up in a small town in Georgia. He was a powerful voice for civil rights, but he was an ardent supporter of Israel, and he spoke out against bigotry and racism and anti-Semitism, and he's been an inspiration for me my entire life. So I learned from him a great love for Israel, and I also learned from him grassroots activism, and that's why I was so proud to pass and sponsor the Iran divestment legislation that he spoke about at the city of Miami Gardens. We no longer do business. Thank you.
You know, it sort of shocks me that there needs to be Iran divestment, as if, why is anyone investing in Iran? It's like tying your own noose.
Absolutely, and by the way, the city of Miami Gardens is primarily an African-American city. We don't have a large Jewish population there, but we understood the importance of that legislation. And again, we don't invest in any companies that do business in Iran, and we understand we need to stand with Israel. We understand the strategic importance of Israel. It's the right thing to do to make sure that we have a strong Israel, and we need to bring on board other African-American communities as well.
Thank you so much. My dad wanted to name me Nancy. He thought it would make me tough and give me character to walk around all day with a name like Nancy. Same reason he tried to get me to wear a pink tutu at my bar mitzvah. But I told him that that wasn't the way to go. That being tough is something from within, something you accrue through life. And let me tell you, our guests, our awardees with the Defender of Israel Award, these are tough cookies. Because to wake up every day in the world we live in, it takes a lot of moral clarity and courage to stare the world down and just speak the truth. And I found them tremendously inspiring. So please join me for one last round of applause for our winners. So let us all get a little bit of inspiration from them and redouble our own efforts to help with the welfare of Israel, of the Jewish people, and really for all of mankind, the entire world. Shalom from Florida. Shlomo, come on! Shlomo everything!
Atatan kunterachem Zion, ki etechenena ki v'amoed. Atatan kunterachem Zion, ki etechenena ki v'amoed. Ki v'amoed, ki v'amoed, ki v'amoed, ki v'amoed. Ha-la-la-la-la-la, ha-la-la-la-la-la, oh-oh. Ha-la-la-la-la-la, ha-la-la-la-la, ha-la-la-la-la-la, ha-la-la-la-la, oh-oh. Ha-la-la-la-la-la, ha-la-la-la-la, oh-oh. Ha-la-la-la-la-la, ha-la-la-la-la, oh. Ha-la-la-la-la-la, ha-la-la-la-la, oh. Ha-la-la-la-la, oh, yo. Ha-la-la-la-la, oh, yo. Ha-la-la-la-la, oh, yo. Ha-la-la-la-la, oh, oh. Ha-la-la-la-la-la, Jeremy Compel, our host.